What if your anxiety isn't a flaw in your brain, but a deliberate line of code designed to keep you trapped? We are conditioned to believe that fixing our lives requires complex, exhausting solutions. But what if that assumption is just a feature of the system, a firewall built to distract you from the terrifying simplicity of the truth? This is the story of Silas, a man who stopped running the system's software, discovered the ultimate cheat code to human consciousness, and successfully hacked the simulation's anxiety engine. Silas lived in a hyper-advanced, seamlessly integrated metropolis known simply as the Engine. The Engine was a marvel of predictive algorithms and social engineering, designed with one primary directive: to keep its citizens' stress levels at absolute zero while maximizing their productivity. Whenever a citizen felt a spike of sadness, a lack of motivation, or the painful friction of a failing relationship, the Engine was there to offer a neural patch. These patches were highly complex, expensive digital seminars and behavioral protocols downloaded directly into the citizen's optical implants. Silas, a mid-level data analyst, was a model citizen. His mind was filled with dozens of these patches, each one promising to optimize his social dynamics, his body language, and his emotional output. But despite having the most advanced psychological software money could buy, Silas felt like he was slowly suffocating. He was exhausted, chronically anxious, and entirely paralyzed by the sheer volume of complex protocols he was supposed to be running in his mind every single day. One evening, while researching historical data archives, Silas stumbled upon a corrupted, unencrypted file from the pre-Engine era. It was an ancient primitive text detailing what the ancestors called the analog protocol. The protocol didn't require a download, it didn't cost credits, and it didn't involve a 6-step cognitive reframing process. It consisted of 2 impossibly simple commands: disconnect from the network for 8 hours of unconscious rest, and move your physical body through an outdoor environment for 60 minutes a day. To Silas's highly optimized mind, the analog protocol seemed absurd, almost insulting in its simplicity. How could walking outside and sleeping possibly fix the deep, existential dread that his expensive neural patches had failed to cure? But driven by a desperate, quiet rebellion, Silas decided to test the ancient code. He disabled his optical implants, shut down his connection to the Engine's Wi-Fi, and forced his body into 8 hours of silent, unmonitored sleep. The next morning, he bypassed the automated transport tubes and simply walked through the city, feeling the raw, unrendered friction of the physical world against his skin. The results were immediate and terrifying to the system's monitoring algorithms. By executing the analog protocol, Silas had inadvertently bypassed the Engine's complexity trap. He realized that the system intentionally conflated difficult with complex to keep citizens dependent on its products. Breaking up with a toxic partner, for example, is incredibly emotionally difficult, but it is not complex. You simply say the words and leave. By convincing citizens that difficult actions required complex, multi-step solutions, the Engine kept them paralyzed in a state of perpetual learning and procrastination. Silas had found the back door. The most effective antidepressant in the simulation wasn't a pharmaceutical or a digital patch. It was the free, analog act of moving through the world and resting the hardware. As the analog protocol flushed the residual noise from Silas's system, he experienced something entirely alien: absolute silence. For the first time in his life, the constant hum of the Engine's directives faded, leaving behind a vast, echoing emptiness within his own mind. In the architecture of the simulation, this internal space was known as the core, a localized database meant to store a citizen's deepest values, passions, and priorities. But as Silas examined his own core, he made a chilling discovery. It was almost entirely empty. He realized that beneath the layers of downloaded patches and societal programming, he had absolutely no idea what he actually cared about. The Engine's monitoring algorithms immediately detected this internal vacuum. In the logic of the simulation, an empty core is a critical vulnerability, a space where unpredictable, unmonitored human agency might suddenly compile and execute. To neutralize the threat, the system initiated an aggressive countermeasure: deploying a swarm of highly targeted distraction algorithms. These weren't obvious attacks. They were personalized, hyper-stimulating data streams disguised as urgent news, social outrage, and fleeting entertainment. The engine began bombarding Silas's optical implants with a relentless barrage of trivial information, desperately trying to autofill his empty core with its own manufactured priorities. The assault was a literal DDoS attack on his attention span, demanding that he care about everything, everywhere, all at once. The system flashed notifications about impending global crises, trending social metrics, and the glamorous, curated lives of other citizens. Silas understood the trap. If you do not manually write your own priority code, the world will forcefully insert its own. The system incentivizes you to adopt its values, tricking you into believing that the things you are passively consuming are the things you actively chose. It was a brilliant, insidious form of control that masked total compliance as free will. Looking around the metropolis, Silas could see the devastating long-term effects of this autofill programming. He observed older citizens suffering from what rogue coders called the 40-year glitch. These were people who had allowed the engine to dictate their core values for decades, pursuing prestigious careers and social approval simply because the algorithm told them to. Then, one day, the programming degrades, and they wake up to the horrifying realization that they have lived their entire lives for someone else. They had spent every ounce of their processing power trying to impress a faceless system, only to find themselves trapped in a self-constructed prison of borrowed desires. Realizing that cheap entertainment wasn't working on Silas, the engine shifted its strategy to a more sophisticated virus: predictive distraction. It flooded his interface with endless tutorials, complex new methodologies, and infinite possibilities for self-improvement. But Silas saw through the code, recognizing that endlessly gathering new information is just a smart person's favorite way to procrastinate. It was a mechanism designed to keep him preparing for life rather than actually living it, complicating what should be a simple choice. To survive, Silas knew he had to ruthlessly sever these connections, blocking out the noise so he could finally hear his own signal. Silas quickly realized that blocking the engine's direct broadcast wasn't enough. The system also used other citizens as peer-to-peer nodes to enforce compliance. Every time he interacted with someone, their optical implants attempted a handshake protocol to automatically sync their values and expectations with his own. To protect his newly emptied core, Silas needed to build a robust defense mechanism, something the rogue coders referred to as a cryptographic firewall. In the ancient analog world, this defense mechanism was simply known as the ability to be disliked. It is the psychological armor required to free oneself from the prison of other people's opinions, proving that it is better to be rejected for your true code than accepted for a fake one. While searching for a way to build this firewall, Silas uncovered a deeply buried historical file detailing a legendary user known as the Cassius anomaly. This user was a top-tier physical combat avatar who was drafted by the system to execute a violent overseas expansion protocol. Instead of complying with the hive mind, the anomaly refused the command, willingly accepting the system's severe punishments. His rank was stripped, his license revoked, and his avatar temporarily quarantined. The anomaly proved a fundamental law of the simulation's physics. Your core code isn't defined by what you passively pursue, but by what you are actively willing to sacrifice. If you aren't willing to experience friction and be penalized by the network, your values are just borrowed data implanted by the system. For Silas, generating this friction was agonizing at first, triggering a cascade of internal error messages. The engine had programmed its citizens with a compliance feedback loop, a line of code that triggered intense, simulated guilt whenever a user rejected a social request or stood on their own. Since childhood, citizens were trained to neglect their own bandwidth in order to process the emotional loads and expectations of the people around them. Because they were never allowed to experience the friction of standing up for their own code, their internal conflict muscle had completely atrophied. Silas realized that if saying no felt like a catastrophic system failure, it meant he had been successfully domesticated by the network. To rebuild his firewall, Silas knew he couldn't attempt a massive system override on his very first try. Just as a physical avatar wouldn't attempt to lift a 400-pound rendering on day one, Silas had to start by generating micro-frictions. He began by declining minor social sync requests, refusing to allocate his processing power to activities he didn't actually value. He stopped taking responsibility for the emotional error logs of his peers, letting their localized problems remain their own. These small acts of defiance were the equivalent of lifting light weights, slowly building his tolerance for being out of sync with the overarching simulation. As Silas executed these micro-frictions, he braced himself for a massive retaliatory strike from the network's social algorithms. He expected his peers to push back with equal and opposite force, punishing him for his sudden non-compliance and boundary setting. But to his absolute shock, the pushback almost never came, revealing a hilarious, liberating glitch in the social matrix. He discovered that the other nodes in the network simply didn't have the processing power to care about his choices as much as he did. The paralyzing fear of being disliked was just a predictive rendering error. In reality, everyone else was too busy running their own survival scripts to notice his quiet rebellion. Having successfully blocked the external noise with his cryptographic firewall, Silas turned his attention to his own internal software. He hacked into the deepest layer of his neural architecture, a subsystem known as the predictive rendering engine. The engine's primary function was to take old data logs, write narratives around them, and project simulated futures to keep the user safe from potential harm. Silas realized that his chronic anxiety wasn't a hardware malfunction. It was just the rendering engine aggressively preloading worst-case scenarios. The system was constantly generating terrifying high-definition simulations of public humiliation and failure, paralyzing him before he even took a step. But as Silas analyzed the source code of these projections, he discovered a massive, fundamental glitch in human programming. He found that the raw physiological data for anxiety and the raw data for confidence were absolutely identical. The elevated heart rate, the heightened senses, the internal tension, it was all just unformatted raw energy labeled as uncertainty. The system didn't dictate how this energy was used. It simply required the user to apply a narrative overlay to the raw data. Both fear and confidence require you to believe in a simulated future that hasn't actually happened yet, meaning you are always choosing which illusion to run. To confirm this theory, Silas pulled the biometric logs of the simulation's highest-performing avatars, the elite athletes and public speakers. He expected to find that these top-tier users possessed a patch that completely eliminated stress and self-doubt from their systems. Instead, the data revealed that the high performers experienced the exact same catastrophic stress metrics as the avatars who completely crumbled under pressure. The only difference was the narrative overlay. The successful users manually overrode the default crash sequence and forced the system to render a success narrative. They didn't get rid of the fear, they simply trained their minds to interpret the raw uncertainty as the fuel required for peak performance. This revelation led Silas to uncover the biggest lie the engine had ever sold to its citizens: the illusion of motivation. The system had conditioned everyone to believe that motivation was a prerequisite for action, a necessary download you had to wait for before doing anything difficult. But Silas realized that the simulation utilized lazy rendering, a processing trick where the environment only generates after the user's avatar begins to move. Motivation is not the cause of action. It is the localized physical effect generated by the momentum of taking the very first step. Silas decided to test this by initiating a complex, highly difficult coding sequence without waiting for the system to grant him the desire to do it. He simply executed the smallest possible action, typing a single line of rogue code, and let the physical momentum carry him forward. Instantly, the simulation was forced to catch up to his movements, rendering the motivation, the focus, and the passion in real time. He finally understood that you don't wait to find your passion. You force the system to generate it by developing competency and agency through relentless, unmotivated action. Silas now had the tools to rewrite his reality, but he still faced the simulation's ultimate deterrent: the fear of a critical system failure. The engine had programmed its citizens to believe that missing a target or making a mistake would result in a catastrophic crash, resetting their progress to absolute zero. This fear kept millions of avatars frozen in their designated safe zones, terrified that one wrong input would permanently corrupt their identity files. But as Silas executed his new, unapproved code, he inevitably encountered errors and stumbled, bracing himself for the devastating wipeout he had always feared. Instead of a blue screen of death, he experienced what the rogue architects called an iterative patch. He realized that failure wasn't a crash at all. It was a forced software update that rebooted his avatar at a slightly higher resolution than before. With every mistake, Silas acquired new data, mapped unknown territories, and built a stronger baseline for his next attempt. He discovered that the trajectory of a liberated mind doesn't move in a perfect, unbroken line. It fluctuates wildly, trending upward through a series of jagged, painful corrections. The system wanted him to believe that failure was the opposite of success, a binary outcome of either 1 or 0. In truth, failure was just the raw compiling process of success, a necessary friction required to render a more complex reality. To verify this, he accessed the restricted logs of a legendary historical avatar known as the Emancipator, a leader who suffered massive, paralyzing system errors and public rejection. The Emancipator didn't possess a flawless code devoid of depression or self-doubt. His internal error logs were filled with profound, crippling insecurities. Yet he simply tolerated a staggering number of iterative failures, using each painful patch to eventually upgrade the entire simulation's operating system. The only difference between a master architect and a trapped citizen is that the architect has survived enough patches to become immune to the fear of crashing. They don't get rid of the self-doubt. They just learn to execute their code, despite the warning sirens blaring in their minds. Silas finally understood that a happy existence within the simulation wasn't a life devoid of error messages or stress. The engine sold the lie of a frictionless, problem-free utopia. But true optimization meant choosing meaningful stress. Happiness is not the absence of problems. It is the deliberate act of upgrading your code so you can tackle better, more complex problems. You don't eliminate the struggle. You simply level up your avatar so you can face higher-tier challenges. Silas was no longer afraid of the system's error codes because he knew every failure was just the simulation bending to his will. As Silas mastered his new programming, he confronted the simulation's final and most insidious lie, the illusion of runtime expiration. The engine enforced a strict psychological parameter dictating that after a certain number of cycles, an avatar's core code became permanently read-only. The system convinced older citizens that it was simply too late to change their class, learn a new skill, or rewrite their identity files. This artificial time limit was designed to save the network massive amounts of processing power by keeping legacy users locked in predictable, low-energy loops. But Silas knew that time within the simulation was just another construct, a variable that could be manipulated by sheer, unyielding repetition. Deep within the encrypted archives, Silas uncovered the ultimate proof, the file of an avatar known only as the acoustic virtuoso. At cycle 62, following the deletion of her primary companion node, this avatar suddenly initiated a highly complex, mathematically dense acoustic rendering protocol. The system immediately flagged her actions as an anomaly, sending peer-to-peer agents to warn her that she was far past her optimal learning window. They told her to accept her read-only status, insisting that her hardware was too degraded to process such intricate new subroutines. But the virtuoso ignored the system's warnings, manually executing the acoustic protocol all day, every single day, forcing the simulation to render her new reality. By the time the virtuoso reached cycle 90, she had been running the acoustic protocol continuously for over 30 cycles. She had accumulated more active runtime in that specific skill than most newly generated specialized avatars had been alive. She flawlessly executed the most complex historical algorithms, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, tricking the system into believing she had been coded as a master musician from birth. No one in the network could comprehend that she had only written her first line of acoustic code in the late stages of her runtime. She proved a terrifying truth to the engine. The simulation's physics engine responds exclusively to relentless repetition, completely ignoring the creation date of the avatar. Silas looked out over the sprawling, hyper-connected metropolis of the engine, finally seeing the matrix of control for what it truly was. He realized that extraordinary results are not the product of special coding. They are the result of repeating ordinary actions over an unordinary amount of time. It is never too late to initiate a new protocol, to change your parameters, or to completely rewrite your identity from scratch. The only real failure in the simulation is choosing to remain a passive passenger, allowing the system to dictate the limits of your existence. The time to compile your new reality is always right now. The only question is how long you will sit there, pretending that your code is locked. Silas reached up to the back of his neck, his fingers brushing against the cold metallic port of his primary optical implant. With one final decisive motion, he severed the connection, plunging his mind into the terrifying, beautiful silence of the analog world. He was no longer a localized node in the engine's network. He was a sovereign architect, ready to build a reality of his own design. The system will always try to tell you who you are, what you should fear, and when your time is up. But the code is yours to write. So what are you going to build? I am Think Glent. Keep thinking.